Because I mentioned earlier that today we are going to talk about the prime areas of growth and development and learning. I will just refer to the material I anchor my session in. The material you will find also posted on Google Classroom, but also you will see the link here. So we will talk, and it is reflected in the material above, we will talk about the prime areas of learning and development. So let's now first have a look at what these prime areas actually are. We will talk about three prime areas. So one is the physical development, which has its two main aspects, moving and handling, and health and self-care. Another prime area is personal, social, and emotional development, with the more detailed split into three aspects: making relationships, self-awareness and self-confidence, and managing feelings and behavior. And the third prime area is communication and language, under which we will talk about listening and attention, and understanding and speaking. So keep in mind the prime areas, and we will now consider why do we talk about these prime areas. We should understand that, of course, in the first place, we have to satisfy and meet the basic needs of the child, and we have to advance his core skill areas. So this is why we talk only about these three prime areas. And secondly, again, related to the findings on brain studies, we talk about prime areas because if we meet the expectations of the brain in these three prime areas, then we will set up a very steady foundation and platform for developing specific areas that I will talk about in the next session. So this is why we talk only about these three prime areas. Let's look at the how of prime areas. So they are fundamental and they work together. We should understand that all the processes which happen in children, they happen simultaneously, they happen at the same time. We cannot talk about physical development as separate from social development, or we cannot talk about development in language skills as separate from self-confidence development. So we should understand that all these three prime areas go hand in hand, and they work together and they move together through the life, and they support each other. And of course, again, prime areas develop in the interaction with environment through the experiences that the child will get. Motivation, attitudes, values is something that is also formed as a core through developing these three prime areas. We will talk about prime areas one by one, but before that, I want you to think about the concept of age, because when we look at the early childhood education, we tend to think in terms of certain classification, that what is certain age is good or optimal for what kind of skill development. So age is actually a very tricky concept, even though it's a central concept to psychology and to pedagogy. And actually, it also is the key to the challenges that practice sets for us. So age can be considered from many different perspectives. physiological age, psychological age, social age, or cultural, ethic, national perspective on age, educational age, or age as a medical phenomena. Let's assume if the child has certain physical inborn disability, we have to talk about his age in medical terms. So keep in mind all these perspectives that age can be actually treated differently. We will look at the age as a pedagogical phenomenon. What it means in practice. It means that we will use a complex approach to designing our early childhood education activities, contexts, goals, tasks, forms, methods, because we will take into account all the aspects of the child's development. Again, we have to be aware of what actually we are looking for when we define the age of a child. And we have to also be aware of what actually we see when we define the age. So it is easy to think in terms of, let's say we have an orchard and we have trees with fruits. So we tend to think about development in terms of seeing the fruits on the trees. But we have difficulty to see that development as a process. So as a process of getting mature, not yet completing its cycle. So people in early childhood education, whether parents or whether educators, should also think that we are not only looking for the fruits, for the output side. We are not talking about age in this term. We talk about age in terms of process, because the development is a dynamic process. And as I've mentioned already, while some functions develop at a much faster rate, some functions may be experiencing some sort of delay. So be sensitive to this as an educator or as a parent, and think of a whole process. Think that you are not just looking for the fruits, think that you are looking for the signs which would give you the hints, but those signs are located in the process. Nevertheless, we tend to design classifications, and we tend to talk about early childhood in terms of certain age groups. But I think in this graph, in this slide, you can see that what I've just talked about, that there is and there cannot be any fixed or strict age boundary. It is just a suggestive split by age, but we have to understand that stages of the development and ages of the development, they overlap. So this is just like a sort of a guiding framework for people who work in early childhood education. So we could talk about infants, we could talk about toddlers, and we could talk about preschoolers. And then within these three age groups or three categories, we could still talk about like shorter periods. And I could characterize them in terms of a dominant activity. So to describe each period, we can look at the dominant activity the child is engaged in. So of course, from birth to, let's say, about 15 months, it's very much about emotional communication and about building the connection with the environment through developing a positive relationship with the environment. An overlapping period is starting at about age of 8 months. It's a period for like more of object manipulation and play as a dominant activity through this period. And then when we reach the stage of a junior preschooler, we can talk about the various types of play, or more broad range of play as a dominant activity. So this is to give you an idea of the dominant activity typical for certain age, but also to encourage you to think that certain stages and certain periods, they overlap in the development of child.